London, 1854. Miss Millicent Fairchild stood motionless at the edge of the ballroom, her gloved fingers clasped tightly before her as she watched the couples twirl across the polished floor. The Countess of Pembroke's annual autumn ball was, as always, the most lavish of the early season, with crystal chandeliers casting their golden glow upon the cream of society. The orchestra played a lively waltz, and laughter floated through the air like perfume. 3 years had passed since Millicent had last danced at such an affair. 3 years since the scandal that had transformed her from one of London's most sought-after débutantes to a shadow lingering at the edges of ballrooms, invited only through obligation to her aunt, Lady Harrington, who had taken her in when her own parents had all but disowned her. "You might as well be invisible," her cousin Cecilia had whispered earlier that evening, not unkindly. "No one will notice if you slip away to the library." But Millicent had refused. She would not hide, though the pain of watching others enjoy what she was forbidden nearly overwhelmed her. The rules of society were clear: a young woman who had compromised herself could not expect to participate in certain social rituals. Dancing was chief among them. To allow her to waltz would be to condone her behavior, to suggest that her disgrace was forgettable. And society never forgot. "Miss Fairchild." The deep voice startled her, and she turned to find herself looking up into the face of the Duke of Rothsbury. She had never been formally introduced to him, though everyone in London knew of York Rothsbury. At 33, he had inherited the dukedom 3 years prior after his father's death. He was known to be serious, reserved, and impossibly wealthy, with estates stretching from Yorkshire to Cornwall. His dark hair was impeccably styled, his evening clothes perfectly tailored to his tall frame. "Your Grace," she cursed, heart fluttering with alarm. Why would the Duke of Rothsbury address her? Men of his standing did not acknowledge women bearing her reputation, particularly not in public. "I believe this is our dance." He extended his hand, his expression revealing nothing. Millicent's breath caught in her throat. "I beg your pardon." "The waltz, Miss Fairchild." "I've come to claim it." Her cheeks burned. "There must be some mistake." "I am not on your dance card, Your Grace." "There is no mistake." Something flickered in his grey eyes, determination, perhaps. "I should like to dance with you, if you would do me the honor." The murmuring had already begun. From the corner of her eye, Millicent could see Lady Harrington's shocked face, the widening eyes of the dowagers seated nearby, the furtive glances exchanged between débutantes. "I cannot," she whispered. "You must know I cannot." "I believe you can." "I am asking you to." "It is not done, Your Grace." Her voice trembled. "I am not, that is, I do not dance." "Not anymore." "An oversight I intend to remedy immediately." He kept his hand extended, unwavering. "Miss Fairchild, will you do me the honor of this dance?" To refuse a duke publicly would only create a fresh scandal. To accept would violate every unwritten rule that governed her existence since that terrible summer. Either way, tongues would wag for weeks. Millicent placed her trembling hand in his. The shock that rippled through the ballroom was palpable as the Duke of Rothsbury led the disgraced Miss Fairchild onto the floor. The orchestra faltered for a moment before continuing with renewed vigor. Ladies fanned themselves vigorously behind raised hands, whispering furiously. "You should not have done this," Millicent said softly as his hand settled at her waist, keeping the proper distance that somehow felt unbearably intimate after years of social isolation. "I am a duke," he replied simply. "I may dance with whomever I please." "Your reputation is secure enough to withstand one waltz." "Mine is not." His lips curved slightly. "Your reputation, Miss Fairchild, can hardly be damaged further by accepting a proper dance with a peer of the realm." The bluntness of his assessment stung, though she could not deny its truth. Still, as they began to move with the music, Millicent found herself suddenly, acutely aware of how much she had missed this, the rhythm, the movement, the simple joy of dancing. "You dance beautifully," he observed. "I once loved it above all things," she admitted. Before the incident with Lord Pemberton's son, he finished for her when she fell silent. Millicent missed a step, but the Duke's firm guidance kept her from faltering noticeably. You know of that. Everyone knows of it. Of course they did. The daughter of a respected baronet, caught in a compromising position with the Marquis of Sefton's youngest son. The hasty departure of the young man for the continent. The broken engagement. The whispers that followed her everywhere. What the Tun didn't know, what only she and Timothy Pemberton knew, was that she had been innocent of the worst of the accusations. A stolen kiss in the garden, yes. But the story had grown, twisted, become something far more damning by the time it reached her father's ears. And yet you asked me to dance. I did. Why? The Duke's gaze was steady. Perhaps I dislike seeing injustice perpetuated. 3 years seems punishment enough for whatever indiscretion occurred. Society does not agree. Society rarely agrees on anything of consequence. They fell silent then, moving together through the steps of the waltz. Millicent was keenly aware of every eye upon them, of the heat of the Duke's hand at her waist, of the strange sense of protection she felt in his presence. When the music ended, she cursed deeply. "Thank you, Your Grace. You have been most kind. I should like to call upon you tomorrow, Miss Fairchild," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "There is a matter I wish to discuss." Before she could respond, he bowed and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the center of the ballroom until her aunt hurried forward to retrieve her. "What were you thinking?" Lady Harrington hissed, guiding her firmly from the floor. "Dancing with the Duke of Rothsbury. Every person in this room is talking about it." "He asked me," Millicent said numbly. "I could hardly refuse. This will only make things worse. The gossip will start anew. Lord Whitby was just beginning to consider you for his daughter's companion, now he'll never agree to it." The prospect of becoming a paid companion to a 17-year-old girl had been bleak enough, but it was one of the few respectable positions open to her. Now even that might be lost. "I'm sorry, Aunt." Lady Harrington sighed. "It's not entirely your fault. The Duke should have known better. Perhaps he's been too long away from town to remember how these things work." But Millicent suspected the Duke of Rothsbury knew exactly how society worked, and had chosen to defy its rules nevertheless. True to his word, the Duke's carriage appeared before Lady Harrington's townhouse the following afternoon. Millicent, wearing her best day dress, a modest gown of dove grey that had been altered 3 times to keep pace with changing fashions, received him in the small front parlour, her aunt seated primly nearby as chaperone. "Your Grace," Lady Harrington greeted him with a bow of her head. "This is an unexpected honour." "Lady Harrington." The Duke bowed. "Miss Fairchild." Millicent cursed, unable to meet his eyes. In the light of day, their dance seemed a strange dream. "I shall be direct," he said once they were seated. "I have recently acquired a property in Kent, Thornfield Hall, that has been sadly neglected. The library, in particular, requires cataloguing and organization. I am in need of someone with literary knowledge and discretion to undertake the task." Millicent looked up in surprise. "I have been informed that Miss Fairchild possesses both qualities. I would like to offer her the position." "As a librarian?" Lady Harrington asked, clearly baffled. "As my literary curator," the Duke clarified. "The position would include accommodation at Thornfield, of course, and a generous stipend. My widowed sister, Lady Helena Trent, resides there and would serve as companion and chaperone." Millicent's mind raced. This was not at all what she had expected when the Duke had asked to call upon her. A position, a real position, not as someone's companion or governess, but doing work she might actually enjoy. "Your Grace," Lady Harrington began carefully, "while your offer is most generous, I must express concern about the propriety of such an arrangement. Miss Fairchild's situation is delicate." "I am well aware of Miss Fairchild's situation," he replied evenly. "Which is precisely why I am offering her a chance to remove herself from London society for a time, to engage in meaningful work, and perhaps to allow certain memories to fade." "It is still unusual," Lady Harrington persisted. "A single gentleman employing a young woman of good family, I will not be in residence at Thornfield except occasionally, the Duke interrupted. My primary home remains Rothsbury Park in Yorkshire. And as I mentioned, my sister will be present at all times. Millicent found her voice at last. May I ask why you have chosen me for this position, Your Grace? We had never spoken before last night. The Duke's gaze met hers directly. I observed you at Lady Pembroke's ball for some time before approaching you. You spent nearly an hour examining the paintings in the East Gallery with obvious appreciation, and I overheard your remarkably insightful comment about Milton to Lord Harrington. I need someone with intelligence and aesthetic sensibility. You appear to possess both. The explanation was perfectly reasonable, and yet Millicent sensed there was more to it, something the Duke was not saying. When would this position begin? She asked. Immediately, if possible. The library has been neglected for decades. I plan to return to Kent next week and would like you to accompany me then. Lady Harrington looked deeply troubled. This is all very sudden. We would need time to consider, of course, the Duke said smoothly, rising to his feet. I shall return tomorrow for your answer. Good day, Lady Harrington. Miss Fairchild. After he left, Millicent's aunt rounded on her. You cannot seriously be considering this. It sounds like a perfectly respectable position, Millicent countered. And a chance to leave London. That is precisely what worries me. Once you leave the protection of your family, your reputation will be entirely in the hands of the Duke and his sister. We know nothing of Lady Helena's character. We know she is a Duke's sister, which should count for something. Lady Harrington shook her head. Millicent, you must understand how this appears. The Duke of Rothsbury singles you out for a dance, the first time you have danced in 3 years, and then immediately offers you a position in his household. People will talk. People already talk, Millicent replied, a rare flash of bitterness in her voice. They have talked for 3 years. They will talk if I become Lord Whitby's daughter's companion. They will talk if I marry some desperate widower with 6 children. They will talk if I remain here, a burden on your charity, until I am old and grey. Her aunt flinched. You are not a burden. I am. We both know it. Uncle Harrington tolerates me only because you insist, and Cecilia resents the attention my scandal still attracts. Millicent took a deep breath. This position offers me independence, aunt. Real work. A chance to be valued for my mind rather than judged for my past. Lady Harrington's expression softened. I only wish to protect you. I know. But perhaps it is time I found a way to protect myself. In the end, Lady Harrington agreed to allow Millicent to accept the position, though with obvious reservations. The Duke returned the following day, as promised, and arrangements were made for Millicent to travel to Kent the following week in the Duke's own carriage, accompanied by her lady's maid, Agnes. The journey to Kent took the better part of a day. Millicent spent most of it gazing out the window at the passing countryside, trying to quiet her nervousness about the strange turn her life had taken. When they finally arrived at Thornfield Hall, twilight was settling over the landscape. The house was larger than Millicent had expected, not as grand as a ducal seat, certainly, but impressive nonetheless, with ivy-covered stone walls and tall windows that glowed with welcoming light. The Duke himself helped her from the carriage, his gloved hand steady beneath hers. Welcome to Thornfield, Miss Fairchild. I hope you will be comfortable here. Before she could respond, the front door opened, and a woman hurried down the steps. She was perhaps 40, with the Duke's dark hair, though hers was streaked with silver, and a warm smile that immediately put Millicent at ease. You must be Miss Fairchild. I am Helena Trent, York's sister. We are so pleased you've come. She took Millicent's hands in hers. My brother tells me you are to save our poor neglected library from total ruin. I shall do my best, Lady Helena. You must call me Helena, my dear. We shall be great friends, I'm certain of it. The Duke cleared his throat. Perhaps we might continue this inside? Miss Fairchild has had a long journey. Helena laughed. Always so practical, York. Yes, Come inside, Miss Fairchild. Mrs. Collins has prepared a light supper, and your rooms are ready. Your maid arrived with the luggage cart an hour ago. As they entered the house, Millicent was struck by its warmth. Unlike many grand homes, Thornfield Hall felt lived in, comfortable rather than imposing. Helena chattered away, pointing out rooms and features as they passed, while the Duke followed silently behind them. After supper, during which Helena carried most of the conversation, the Duke suggested showing Millicent the library. It can wait until tomorrow, Helena protested. Miss Fairchild must be exhausted. I would like to see it now, if that's all right, Millicent said. Just briefly. The Duke nodded, seemingly pleased, and led her down a corridor to a set of double doors. He hesitated before opening them. I should warn you, it's in rather worse condition than I may have suggested. When he pushed open the doors, Millicent understood why. The library was vast, 2 stories tall with a gallery running around the upper level. But it was in a state of magnificent chaos. Books were piled haphazardly on tables, stacked on the floor, crammed into shelves without any discernible order. Dust covered everything, and several windows were shuttered, leaving the room dim and musty. Oh, Millicent breathed. My father was a collector but not an organizer, the Duke explained. After his death, I discovered that he had purchased entire libraries from estates in financial difficulty, but never properly integrated the volumes into his own collection. The previous curator retired 10 years ago, and no one has really tended to it since. Millicent stepped further into the room, already mentally cataloguing the work ahead. It's wonderful, she said softly. The Duke looked surprised. Wonderful? It's a disaster. It's a treasure trove, she corrected him, running her fingers along the spine of a leather-bound volume. Who knows what might be hidden here? Something in his expression changed, softened, perhaps. Then you are not discouraged by the task. On the contrary, Your Grace. I'm eager to begin. For the first time since she had met him, the Duke of Rothsbury smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face and made him appear years younger. I had a feeling you were the right person for this, Miss Fairchild. In that moment, standing amidst the literary chaos of Thornfield Hall's library, Millicent felt something she had not experienced in 3 long years, hope. The next weeks fell into a pleasant routine. Millicent rose early each morning, breakfasted with Helena, and then spent her days in the library, organizing, cataloguing, and occasionally losing herself in the pages of some rare volume. The Duke had returned to Yorkshire the day after her arrival, but Helena proved a delightful companion, witty, kind, and refreshingly direct. My brother has never shown such interest in this library before, Helena remarked one afternoon as she brought Millicent tea. I wonder what prompted this sudden concern for its organization. Millicent looked up from the desk where she had been creating a catalogue of the collection's first editions. Perhaps he simply recognized its value. Perhaps, Helena said, though her tone suggested skepticism. Or perhaps it was merely a convenient excuse. For what? Helena smiled enigmatically. Who can say what motivates my brother? York has always been something of a mystery, even to me. After Caroline died, he became even more withdrawn. Caroline? Millicent asked, before she could stop herself. His wife. She died 8 years ago in childbirth, along with their infant son. He has never spoken of remarrying, though of course he must eventually. The dukedom requires an heir. Millicent absorbed this information silently. She had not known the Duke was a widower. Somehow it changed her perception of him, this man who had known real grief, not merely social embarrassment. I'm sorry, she said at last. That must have been terrible for him. And for you. Helena nodded. It was. But life continues, doesn't it? Even when we think it cannot. She gave Millicent a penetrating look. As you know yourself, I imagine. Millicent tensed. Has the Duke told you about my situation? He mentioned there had been some unpleasantness in London. Nothing specific. Helena waved a hand dismissively. London society can be cruel over trifles. I've little patience for it myself, which is why I prefer to remain here in Kent. It was more than a trifle, Millicent said quietly. Though less than what was rumoured. Helena studied her for a moment. You don't have to tell me, my dear. The past is the past. But Millicent found, suddenly, that she wanted to tell someone who might believe her. I was engaged to be married to Sir Thomas Ravenscroft. A good match, everyone said. Then, at Lady Pembroke's summer party, Timothy Pemberton, the Marquis of Sefton's youngest son, cornered me in the garden and kissed me. And you were discovered, Helena guessed. Millicent nodded. By Lady Sefton herself. She immediately accused me of far worse than a stolen kiss. Timothy did nothing to defend me. He let his mother believe what she wanted to believe. Her hand clenched in her lap. By morning, everyone was saying I had been caught in a state of undress, that I had been carrying on affairs with multiple gentlemen. Sir Thomas broke our engagement immediately. Timothy was sent to the continent. And I became a cautionary tale. Helena made a disgusted sound. Men are so rarely held accountable for such things. It's always the woman who bears the punishment. Timothy wrote to me once, from Paris, Millicent continued. Not to apologize, but to suggest that if I were to visit, we might continue where we left off. As if I would want anything to do with the man who stood by while my reputation was destroyed. What a perfect scoundrel, Helena declared. And your family? Did they not defend you? My father believed the worst version of events. He said I had humiliated him and that he could not bear to look at me. My mother wept and took to her bed for weeks. Eventually, my aunt offered to take me in, and they were only too happy to be rid of me. Helena reached across the desk and squeezed Millicent's hand. Then they are fools, my dear. All of them. Tears pricked at Millicent's eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Helena straightened, her expression brightening. Now, enough of the past. Let me help you with these books. York will be returning next week, and I want him to see how much progress you've made. The news that the Duke was returning sent an unexpected flutter through Millicent's chest. She told herself it was merely nervousness about presenting her work to her employer, but in her heart, she knew it was something more complicated. When the Duke arrived the following week, Millicent was in the library, perched precariously on a ladder as she arranged volumes on the highest shelf. She did not hear him enter and was startled when his voice came from below. I see you've made considerable progress, Miss Fairchild. She looked down to find him gazing up at her, his expression unreadable. Your Grace! I didn't realize you had arrived. Just now. He gestured around the library, which was indeed transformed. The dust was gone, the shutters opened to admit sunlight, and the books were being systematically arranged on the shelves according to the classification system Millicent had devised. Helena tells me you are working wonders. Millicent carefully descended the ladder. There is still much to do, but yes, I believe we're making good progress. I discovered several rare volumes that had been misplaced or forgotten, including a first edition of Milton's Paradise Lost that was being used to prop up a table leg. The Duke looked genuinely horrified. Used to prop up a table. Not anymore, she assured him with a smile. It's now properly stored with the other valuable editions. She hesitated. I've taken the liberty of making a list of books that require restoration. Some of the bindings are deteriorating. Of course. Arrange whatever is necessary. Expense is no object when it comes to preserving such treasures. Their eyes met, and Millicent felt that strange flutter again. The Duke looked away first. I shall leave you to your work. Perhaps you would join Helena and me for dinner this evening? I should like to hear more about your discoveries. I would be honored, Your Grace. After he left, Millicent sat down at her desk, her heart beating too rapidly for comfort. She had been at Thornfield for nearly a month now, safe in the bubble of the estate, focused on her work. The Duke's return disrupted the peace she had found, reminding her of London, of the dance that had changed everything, of the mystery of why he had really brought her here. That evening, dressed in her best evening gown, a simple affair of blue silk that had been remodeled twice, Millicent joined the Duke and his sister in the dining room. The conversation flowed easily, with Helena drawing out both Millicent and her brother, who seemed more relaxed here than he had in London. "Miss Fairchild tells me she found a first edition of Paradise Lost supporting a table," he told his sister over the soup course. Helena laughed. "Father would have had an apoplexy." "Milton would have had an apoplexy," the Duke corrected her. "Speaking of books," Helena said, "Miss Fairchild has been reading to me in the evenings. She has a beautiful speaking voice. Perhaps she would favor us with something after dinner." The Duke looked at Millicent. "Would you mind?" "Not at all, if you truly wish it." "I do." After dinner, they retired to the drawing room, where Millicent selected a volume of Wordsworth's poetry from the shelf. As she read, she was acutely aware of the Duke watching her, his grey eyes intent. The poem she had chosen, "She Was a Phantom of Delight," suddenly seemed too revealing, too personal a selection. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before Helena applauded softly. "Beautiful! Didn't I tell you, York? Miss Fairchild should have been on the stage." "I'm not certain that would have improved her social standing," the Duke remarked dryly. Helena rolled her eyes. "Always so proper. But you must admit, she reads wonderfully." "She does," he agreed, his gaze still fixed on Millicent's face. "You have a gift, Miss Fairchild." Millicent felt her cheeks warm. "You are too kind, Your Grace." Later that night, unable to sleep, Millicent wandered back to the library. It had become a sanctuary for her, a place where her past seemed distant and unimportant. She was surprised to find a light burning inside, and even more surprised to discover the Duke seated at her desk, examining her cataloguing work. "Your Grace," she said from the doorway. "I didn't expect to find anyone here." He looked up, not appearing startled in the least. "I often find myself restless at night. The library has always been a refuge. For me as well." She hesitated, uncertain whether to enter or leave him to his solitude. "Please, join me," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "I've been looking at your organizational system. It's quite innovative." Millicent stepped into the room, drawing her dressing gown more tightly around herself, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of being alone with the Duke in her nightclothes. But the library felt like neutral territory somehow, and he seemed completely at ease. "I based it on the system at the British Museum, but adapted it to suit the collection here," she explained, coming to stand beside the desk. The Duke nodded. "I see that. Clever. You've accomplished more in a month than I expected would be possible in 6. "I've enjoyed the work immensely," she admitted. "It's a privilege to handle these books, to discover what's been forgotten here." He studied her face in the lamplight. "You truly love literature." "I do. It has been a companion when other companionship was lacking." Something flickered in his eyes, understanding, perhaps, or recognition. "Yes," he said softly. "I know what you mean." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, and Millicent felt something shift between them, some subtle change in the air. The Duke broke the silence first. "I should return to my rooms. It's late, and I've kept you from your rest." He stood, closing the ledger she had been using to catalogue the collection. "Good night, Miss Fairchild." "Good night, Your Grace." As she watched him leave, Millicent could not shake the feeling that something significant had occurred, though nothing had really happened at all. The Duke remained at Thornfield for a week, during which he spent considerable time in the library. Sometimes he worked alongside Millicent silently, helping to shelve books or sort through papers. Other times they discussed literature, history, or art. She discovered that beneath his reserved exterior lay a keen intellect and unexpected humor. He was well-read and thoughtful, with strong opinions that he was willing to defend but also to reconsider when presented with compelling arguments. "You surprise me," he said one afternoon as they debated the merits of Austen versus the Brontes. "Most young women of my acquaintance would simply agree with whatever literary opinion I expressed." "Then you must know very dull young women, Your Grace," Millicent replied without thinking. Instead of taking offense, he laughed, a rich, genuine sound that transformed his face. "I believe I do, Miss Fairchild. I believe I do." On the Duke's last evening at Thornfield, he hosted a small dinner party. The local vicar and his wife, the neighboring landowner Sir Frederick Palmer, and a few other county families were invited. Millicent, to her surprise, was included not as an employee but as a guest. "You must sit beside me at dinner," Helena insisted as she helped Millicent select a gown for the occasion, a new one that Helena herself had ordered from London, claiming it was a gift for Millicent's excellent work in the library. The dress was more fashionable than anything Millicent had worn in years, with a deep green silk that complemented her auburn hair. "Are you certain it's appropriate for me to attend at all?" Millicent asked nervously. "I'm merely the librarian." Helena waved away her concerns. "You are my friend and my brother's valued employee. Besides, York specifically requested your presence." At dinner, Millicent found herself seated not beside Helena but between the Duke himself and Sir Frederick Palmer, a jovial widower of about 50. The conversation flowed easily, with Sir Frederick telling amusing hunting stories and the Duke occasionally steering the discussion toward more intellectual topics. "Miss Fairchild has been performing miracles in our library," he told the assembled company. "She's discovered works we didn't even know we possessed." "Found a dust allergy yet, have you?" Sir Frederick asked with a chuckle. "Can't abide libraries myself. Too quiet. Give me a good hunt any day." "Miss Fairchild prefers the excitement of literary discovery to fox hunting, I believe," the Duke said, his eyes twinkling as he glanced at her. "Indeed, Your Grace," she replied. "Though I've never tried hunting, so perhaps I shouldn't judge." Sir Frederick laughed heartily. "Well said, Miss Fairchild. You must come riding on my estate someday. Splendid views." "Miss Fairchild rides exceptionally well," the Duke said, surprising her. She had never mentioned her riding abilities to him. "Though she hasn't had much opportunity lately." "How would you know, Rothsbury?" Sir Frederick asked, clearly puzzled. A brief silence fell over the table. The Duke took a sip of wine before answering. "I observed Miss Fairchild riding in Hyde Park some years ago. She has excellent form." Millicent stared at him, astonished. She had indeed ridden frequently in the park before her disgrace, often with her father or her fiancé. But how could the Duke have noticed her? He had been married then, and as far as she knew, not particularly connected to her social circle. The moment passed as Helena deftly changed the subject, but Millicent remained unsettled. After dinner, when the gentlemen joined the ladies in the drawing room, the Duke approached her as she stood by the window. "You seem troubled, Miss Fairchild." "Not troubled, Your Grace. Merely confused." "About?" "You said you saw me riding in Hyde Park some years ago." "That would have been before the incident with Timothy Pemberton. Before we were ever introduced." The Duke was silent for a moment, gazing out at the darkness beyond the window. "Yes," he finally said. "It was during the season of 1851. You were riding a chestnut mare with your father. You wore a blue riding habit." Millicent's breath caught. "You remember such detail?" "I have a good memory," he said, though his tone suggested there was more to it. "But why would you remember me? We had never met." He turned to look at her then, his expression serious. "Perhaps I found you memorable." Before she could respond, Helena called for music, and one of the guests was persuaded to play the pianoforte. The Duke was drawn away by Sir Frederick, and Millicent was left by the window, more confused than ever. The next morning, the Duke departed for London on business, promising to return within a fortnight. Millicent tried to focus on her work, but found her thoughts continually drifting to their conversation, to the mystery of his recognition of her from years before. "You seem distracted today," Helena observed as they walked in the garden a few days later. "Do I?" "I'm sorry." Helena smiled knowingly. "It wouldn't have anything to do with my brother, would it?" Millicent felt her cheeks warm. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." I've seen how he looks at you and how you look at him when you think no one is watching. Helena, please. That's impossible. He is a duke, and I am a gentleman's daughter of good family who has suffered an injustice, Helena finished firmly. And York is not as conventional as you might think. Even so, there is nothing between us but an employer-employee relationship. Helena merely raised an eyebrow. If you say so, my dear. A week passed, and then two, with no word from the Duke. Millicent tried not to feel disappointed. After all, he owed her no explanations. She was merely his employee, whatever Helena might imply. Then one rainy afternoon, as Millicent was working in the library, Mrs. Collins, the housekeeper, appeared at the door. "A letter for you, miss. From London." The letter bore the Duke's seal. Millicent's hands trembled slightly as she broke it. **, Miss Fairchild, **, I apologize for my extended absence. Matters in London have required my attention longer than anticipated. I write to inform you that I will be returning to Thornfield next week, and I shall not be alone. Lord and Lady Pembroke have accepted my invitation to visit, along with their son, Lord Timothy Pemberton, who has recently returned from the continent. **, I understand this news may cause you distress. If you wish to absent yourself during their visit, arrangements can be made for you to stay with my aunt in Dover. However, I hope you will consider remaining at Thornfield. I believe the time has come to address the past directly, rather than allowing it to cast shadows over your future indefinitely. **, If you choose to stay, you have my word that you will be under my protection at all times. **, I remain, respectfully yours. Rothsbury. Millicent read the letter twice, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. Timothy Pemberton, coming here? The man who had ruined her life with a stolen kiss and a coward's silence? Helena found her still sitting in the library an hour later, the letter clutched in her hand. "My dear, what is it? You look as though you've seen a ghost." Wordlessly, Millicent handed her the letter. Helena read it quickly, her expression darkening. "That boy is coming here? After what he did to you? What is York thinking?" "I don't know," Millicent said, her voice small. Perhaps he believes Timothy's version of events over mine." Helena shook her head firmly. "Never. My brother is an excellent judge of character. Then why would he invite them here? Why force me to face Timothy again after all this time?" "I don't know," Helena admitted. "But I trust York. He must have his reasons. Do you think I should leave? Go to Dover as he suggests?" Helena considered this for a moment. "No," she said finally. "I think you should stay and face this Timothy Pemberton. You've done nothing wrong, Millicent. It's time the world, including the Pembertons, recognized that." Despite her fear, Millicent knew Helena was right. Running away would solve nothing. If she ever hoped to reclaim her life, she would need to confront her past. "I'll stay," she decided. "But I confess, I'm afraid." Helena squeezed her hand. "You won't face this alone. I shall be with you. And York, well, I suspect York has a plan." The Duke arrived 3 days later, riding ahead of the Pemberton party, who were to join them the following day. He came directly to the library upon his arrival, still in his travelling clothes. "Miss Fairchild," he said, his expression serious. "You received my letter." "I did, Your Grace." "And you decided to stay?" "Yes." He nodded, seemingly relieved. "Good. We have much to discuss before our guests arrive." He glanced around the library, noting the progress she had made in his absence. "You've been working hard." "It helps me think," she admitted. "Walk with me," he said suddenly. "The rain has stopped, and I find I need fresh air after the journey from London." They walked in silence through the gardens, which were damp but fragrant after the rain. Finally, at the edge of a small ornamental lake, the Duke stopped. "I owe you an explanation," he said, turning to face her. "About why I have invited the Pembertons here." "Yes, I believe you do." He seemed to appreciate her directness. I have spent the past month in London, making inquiries about the events of 3 years ago. I have spoken with people who were at Lady Pembroke's party, including Lady Sefton herself. I have also had a very interesting conversation with Timothy Pemberton. Millicent's heart raced. And I believe I now have a complete understanding of what truly happened that night. His expression hardened. Pemberton has admitted to me privately that he lied. That he allowed his mother and others to believe worse of you than was true. That he made no attempt to defend your honor. Relief washed over Millicent like a wave. He admitted it. Only when faced with certain evidence that made denial impossible. The Duke's jaw tightened. He is not a man of character, Miss Fairchild. You had a fortunate escape, though I know the cost to you has been terrible. But why bring him here now? What purpose does it serve? The Duke's grey eyes met hers directly. Because I intend to force him to make a public acknowledgement of the truth. His parents, the Marquis and Marchioness of Sefton, will also be present. Once they hear their son's confession, they will have no choice but to help restore your reputation. Millicent stared at him in astonishment. You've arranged all this for me? Why? The Duke looked away, his gaze settling on the still surface of the lake. Because an injustice was done to you. Because 3 years of exile from society is punishment enough for a kiss. Because? He hesitated. Because I cannot bear to see you relegated to the shadows when you deserve to dance in the light. The words hung in the air between them, fraught with meaning. Millicent hardly dared breathe. The night we danced, she said softly, you knew who I was. You knew my story. I did. You said you had seen me riding in the park years before. That you remembered me. The Duke nodded, still not looking at her. I saw you many times during that season. You were luminous. Everyone noticed you. I was married then, so I kept my distance. But I remembered you. Now he turned to her, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. When I returned to London after Caroline's death, you were gone from society. I heard the whispers, the rumors. I didn't believe them. You had seemed too genuine for such behavior. You didn't even know me, Millicent whispered. No, he agreed. But I wanted to. And now I do. The implication of his words made her breath catch. Your Grace, York, he corrected gently. When we are alone, I wish you would call me York. York, she repeated, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. What happens after tomorrow? After Timothy confesses? What do you expect to change? Everything, he said simply. Once the truth is known, the ton will rush to make amends. You'll be welcomed back into society. You'll be free to return to London, to have the life that was taken from you. And if I don't want to return to London? If I've found something here that matters more. His eyes darkened with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Then that would be your choice. A free choice, not one forced upon you by circumstance or scandal. They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Finally, the Duke, York, offered her his arm. We should return to the house. Helena will be wondering where we've gone, and there are preparations to be made for tomorrow. Millicent placed her hand on his arm, and they walked back to the house together, each lost in thought about what the next day might bring. The Pembertons arrived the following afternoon in a grand procession of carriages. Millicent watched from her bedroom window as the Marquis and Marchioness of Sefton descended from the first carriage, followed by Lord and Lady Pembroke, and finally, Timothy himself. He had changed little in 3 years, still handsome in a conventional way, with golden hair and blue eyes. But knowing what she knew now, Millicent could see a weakness in his face that she had missed before, or a certain softness around the mouth, a shiftiness in the eyes. Helena came to her room as Millicent was dressing for dinner, wearing a new gown of deep burgundy silk, another of Helena's gifts. "Are you ready for this?" Helena asked, helping Millicent fasten a simple pearl necklace around her throat. As ready as I'll ever be, Millicent replied, surprised to find it was true. The fear she had felt upon receiving York's letter had transformed into something else, a steely determination to face her accusers with dignity. "Remember, York and I are with you," Helena said, squeezing her shoulders gently. "You are not alone." Dinner was a tense affair. Millicent was seated far from Timothy, for which she was grateful, though she could feel his eyes on her throughout the meal. The Marchioness of Sefton regarded her with barely disguised disdain, while Lord and Lady Pembroke seemed merely confused by her presence. After dinner, when the ladies had rejoined the gentlemen in the drawing-room, York called for everyone's attention. "I have asked you all here for a specific purpose," he began, his tone formal but commanding. "A matter of honor that requires resolution." The guests exchanged puzzled glances. Timothy Pemberton suddenly looked distinctly uncomfortable. 3 years ago, at Lady Pembroke's summer party, an incident occurred that resulted in grave damage to Miss Fairchild's reputation. York's gaze swept the room, settling briefly on each person before moving on. "Based on recent evidence and testimony, I believe a great injustice was done to her." "Really, Rothsbury?" the Marchioness of Sefton interjected, her voice cold. "Is this necessary? Ancient history, surely." "Not to Miss Fairchild, whose life was irreparably altered by the events of that night," York countered. "And not to me, who values truth and justice above social convenience." The Marquis of Sefton frowned. "What evidence are you referring to, Rothsbury?" "A series of letters written by your son," York replied, and Timothy visibly paled. "Letters in which he details the truth of what happened that night, and admits to allowing Miss Fairchild to bear the full weight of society's censure for what was, at most, a momentary indiscretion on both their parts." "Letters?" Timothy sputtered. "What letters?" "I never, to your friend, Viscount Harding," York said smoothly. "He was reluctant to share them at first, but when I explained the situation, he agreed it was time for the truth to emerge." Millicent watched the color drain from Timothy's face. She had no idea if such letters actually existed, but Timothy clearly believed they might. "Timothy." Lady Sefton turned to her son. "What is the Duke talking about?" Timothy looked trapped, his eyes darting around the room as if seeking escape. "Mother, it's nothing. Rothsbury is exaggerating." "Am I?" York's voice was dangerously calm. "Perhaps you'd prefer I read excerpts from the letters? I have them here." He reached inside his coat. "No!" Timothy exclaimed. Then, seeing the startled expressions of the others, he composed himself. "That is, there's no need. Then perhaps you would like to tell your parents and the Pembrokes what really happened that night?" York suggested, though his tone made it clear it was not a request. Timothy swallowed hard, then looked at his mother. "It wasn't what you thought," he said miserably. "Miss Fairchild and I, we only kissed. Once. Nothing more. When you found us, you assumed, and I didn't correct you." Lady Sefton stared at her son in horror. "You let me believe it was easier." Timothy burst out. "You were already angry, and father was threatening to cut my allowance if I caused another scandal. Miss Fairchild was engaged to Ravenscroft anyway. What did it matter what people thought? What did it matter?" Helena repeated incredulously. "It mattered everything to Miss Fairchild." "Her engagement was broken," York added, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Her parents all but disowned her. She has spent 3 years living as a virtual exile from society. All because you lacked the courage to speak the truth." Timothy had the grace to look ashamed. "I didn't think." "No, you didn't," York cut him off. "But you will make amends now." He turned to the Marquis and Marchioness. "Your son has confessed to allowing a false version of events to damage Miss Fairchild's reputation. As people of honor, I trust you will do everything in your power to correct this injustice." The Marquis of Sefton looked grim. "Of course. We shall issue a statement immediately. Timothy will make a public apology. And we shall host a ball," the Marchioness added, clearly eager to distance herself from her son's disgrace. "To reintroduce Miss Fairchild to society properly. Lady Pembroke, who had been listening in stunned silence, suddenly spoke up. "I feel terrible, Miss Fairchild. To think this happened under my roof, and I did nothing to investigate the truth." "It wasn't your fault, Lady Pembroke," Millicent said, finding her voice at last. "You couldn't have known." Throughout the exchange, Millicent had remained outwardly calm, though her heart was racing. Now, as the conversation turned to plans for her social rehabilitation, she felt an odd sense of detachment. The vindication she had dreamed of for 3 years was finally happening, and yet it brought her less joy than she had expected. Her eye sought out York, who was watching her with a concerned expression. She gave him a small, reassuring smile, and saw him visibly relax. Later, when the guests had retired for the night, Millicent found herself once again drawn to the library. York was there, as she had somehow known he would be, standing by the window with a glass of brandy in his hand. "You orchestrated all of this," she said softly from the doorway. He turned, not startled by her presence. "I merely created the circumstances for the truth to emerge." Did Viscount Harding really have letters from Timothy? A small smile crossed York's face. "Harding and I were at Oxford together. When I approached him, he was more than happy to imply to Pemberton that such letters existed. In truth, I doubted Pemberton had ever put his confession in writing. He's not that foolish. But he couldn't be certain, and that was enough." "A bluff," Millicent said, impressed despite herself. "A very effective one. Sometimes the appearance of evidence is as powerful as the evidence itself." She moved further into the room, drawn to him despite her confusion about what all of this meant. "Why did you go to such lengths for me?" "The truth." York set down his glass and faced her fully. "Because from the moment I saw you standing alone at Lady Pembroke's ball, I knew I wanted to know you. To understand how a woman who had suffered such injustice could still look at the world with such openness. When we danced, it confirmed everything I had suspected." "You are extraordinary, Millicent." The use of her given name sent a shiver through her. "I'm not," she protested. "I'm just, you are," he insisted. "You faced scandal and exile with dignity. You built a new life for yourself. You've transformed my neglected library into something magnificent, just as you've transformed this house with your presence." He took a step toward her, and then another, until they were standing close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes. "When I invited you here, I told myself it was to give you an opportunity, a respectable position away from London gossip. But the truth is more selfish. I wanted you here because I wanted to be near you. To know you. To see if what I felt when we danced was real." "And was it?" Millicent whispered, hardly daring to hope. "More real than anything I've felt since Caroline died." His hand came up to gently touch her cheek. "I've been alone for a long time, Millicent. I thought that was my fate. And then I danced with you, and everything changed." Millicent's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must hear it. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing her question from the day before. "Now that my name will be cleared. Now that I can return to society." "That depends," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "On what you want. On whether you could see a future here. With me." "Are you asking?" "I'm asking if you could love me," he said simply. "Because I find myself impossibly, completely in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, the most precious of gifts. Millicent felt tears fill her eyes. "I already do," she admitted, her voice trembling with emotion. "I have for weeks now." "But I never thought," York pulled her into his arms then, silencing her with a kiss that held all the promise of the future. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Be my Duchess. Dance every waltz with me for the rest of our lives." Millicent laughed through her tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it." 2 months later, Millicent Fairchild stood at the edge of a different ballroom, the Grand Ballroom at Rothsbury House in London. The occasion was her engagement ball, hosted by the Marquis and Marchioness of Sefton as part of their promised amends. Society had reacted to the news of her engagement to the Duke of Rothsbury with a predictable mixture of shock, envy, and hasty revisionism. Those who had shunned her most thoroughly were now the most effusive in their congratulations. Her parents, initially disbelieving, had quickly recognized the advantages of having a duke for a son-in-law, and were now proudly telling anyone who would listen that they had always supported dear Millicent through her unfortunate misunderstanding. Timothy Pemberton had left for the continent again, this time in genuine disgrace. Sir Thomas Ravenscroft had attempted to suggest that perhaps their broken engagement might be reconsidered, only to be coldly informed by York that Miss Fairchild's affections were now permanently engaged elsewhere. "Are you ready?" Helena asked, appearing at Millicent's side in a gown of silver silk. "York is waiting." "I'm ready," Millicent said, and she was. As she took her fiancé's hand for the opening waltz, Millicent felt none of the nervousness that had plagued her at Lady Pembroke's ball months earlier. This time, as she moved across the floor in the arms of the man she loved, she knew that every eye upon them saw not scandal, but a love story. "Happy?" York murmured as he guided her through the steps. "Perfectly," she replied, smiling up at him. "Though I must confess, I've grown rather fond of our library at Thornfield. I shall miss it when we're in London or Yorkshire. Then we shall simply have to ensure that all our homes have excellent libraries," he said with a smile. "And that we spend ample time in each of them." "Dancing and reading," Millicent said. "The perfect life." "The perfect life with you," York corrected, his eyes filled with love. "Every waltz, every day, for all our days." And as they twirled across the ballroom floor, surrounded by the society that had once shunned her but now celebrated their union, Millicent knew that the scandal that had once defined her had led her, improbably but perfectly, to the greatest happiness of her life.